Gabriel, would you want legislation that's supposed to see the transformation of this economy kept in place? By that I mean triple BEE, affirmative action.
No, I think it should be scrapped. I did a lot of work on the lobbying side, public participation on the public procurement bill to replace the triple PFA. So the government spends R1 trillion a year plus on buying stuff, everything from toilet paper to transistors. And even if you disagree with me about that, I hope we can all agree about this. We should know how much we're spending on those BEE premiums. My biggest complaint is that in the last 24 years under the triple PFA, those BEE premiums have never appeared in the budget. So we don't know, are we spending...
So in this really interesting video, Gabriel Crouse, who is a fellow of the Institute of Race Relations, is actually preferring his arguments on why Black economic empowerment as proposed by the ANC should be scrapped. Let's listen to his arguments in this video, and I'll be back on some analysis which he has actually made on the Daily Maverick on why BEE should be scrapped in South Africa.
Gabriel, firstly, are you apologetic, and what real action, if so, would you pair that with?
I'm certainly not sorry for perpetuating apartheid because I had no hand in it. I think that it was an evil and wicked system and certainly to be regretted. I think that race relations are a difficult thing to talk about. People find it very easy on TV in South Africa to speak about all blacks or all whites as if those groups are monolithic. Of course, there are great varieties within those groups. There are some white racists. Just this weekend, I was looking at a white guy that I've done a YouTube show with, Roman Kabanak, tweeting things that are clearly racist, getting attention out of that. That's very bad. The Institute of Race Relations has done several polls asking people, who do you think is the biggest racist in politics in the country? Most people say Julius Malema.
Okay.
To say Julius Malema is obviously a racist is not to say that all black people are obviously a racist. There's a huge difference between races and huge differences within races. The economy is smaller than it was in 2010. Black unemployment has doubled since 2008. But in terms of the racial composition of the middle class and the upper class, according to Stats SA's latest numbers, black people are the majority of every income stream in South Africa.
Gabriel, would you want legislation that's supposed to see the transformation of this economy kept in place? By that I mean triple BEE, affirmative action.
No, I think it should be scrapped. I did a lot of work on the lobbying side, public participation on the public procurement bill to replace the triple PFA. So the government spends R1 trillion a year plus on buying stuff, everything from toilet paper to transistors. And as Mr. Willie Matabula, the Chief Procurement Officer, said, there's a BEE premium. So more money gets spent for the same thing in order to buy it from a black company. And the cap is 11.1% on large contracts and 25% on small contracts. And the new law is going to remove that cap and say, instead, here comes a tender, we'll set it aside only for MK veterans or only for black youth or only for black women, etc. And we oppose that because we think you should be getting the most value for money. That's what the Zondo report advised. Even if you disagree with me about that, I hope we can all agree about this. We should know how much we're spending on those BEE premiums. My biggest complaint is that in the last 24 years under the triple PFA, those BEE premiums have never appeared in the budget. So we don't know, are we spending 5 billion or 10 billion or 100 billion?
Ayanda, how would we still be able to transform this country's economy without affirmative action, without broad-based black economic empowerment?
I think it would be very difficult to do that if the economy is still owned by the people who have been benefiting by apartheid. We need to understand that triple BEE is not something new. In the 1920s, when the apartheid government realized that they have a poor white problem, 100%. They decided to start state-owned enterprises such as Santam, which was started around that time. And you also have Bankcorp, which has now become ABSA, was started as a part of those state-owned enterprises as well. And so I think that there is a benefit to this. But to what Mr. Moeletsi Mbeki was saying,
yeah, it's Moeletsi Mbeki.
He does make a point to say that unfortunately only a small group of people have benefited from this. And unfortunately it has led to the problems that we're seeing today when it comes to transformation.
Yeah, interesting commentary, interesting speech. really interesting points. BE is has been actually argued to be, encumbered with a lot of problems. I've seen that. I've actually shared a video here where Chris Pappas, one of the DA party premiers, party members who is actually vying for premier of KwaZulu-Natal province at the moment, actually argues that BEE has actually made, the smaller black elite richer at the expense of the wider poor black majority in South Africa. But for this video anyway, I thought to analyze, an interesting article written by Gabriel Crouse here, who's in this video on the Daily Maverick, on why he argues that the Treasury should come clean on how much taxpayers spend on BEE premiums. Okay, so he argues here that that this year should go down as the last when South Africa Finance Minister delivers the budget without accounting for BEE premiums. He says that people will wonder how Treasury managed to get away with anything less for so long. He argues here that Gabriel Crouse argues here that public procurement comes in at about 1.2 trillion rands per annum, making it proverbially the biggest deal in town. And that senior Treasury official, Willie Mathebule, explained to the Parliament earlier in February that taxpayers pay premiums under a 90-10, 80-20 point system. The maximum premium paid in that 90-10 preference point system is 11.1%. So that's a premium that the state is prepared to pay to advance transformation. In terms of 80-20, of course, it is 25%, says Mathebule. So the 11.1 premium cap is on tenders above 50 million rand, while the 25% premium cap is on tenders below 50 million rand. And he argues that the preference points Mathebule mentioned are BEE points. In other words, BEE premiums are capped at 25% per contract, unless a contract is above 50 million rand, when the cap comes down to 11.1%. These are really technical terms anyway. These are really technical, arguments. And this might explain one of the reasons why, according to former President Thabo Mbeki, the Indian company that was recruited to fix the Eskom power station at, Metupe, actually declined, when the ANC proposed that most of its policies, most of its plans to reconstruct that power station must infuse some of these BEE policies. It must have been probably really complicated, or I don't know anyway, but that Indian company refused to go along with most of the BEE policies. So here Gabriel Crouse gives some details into the whole BEE arrangement. So Crouse argues that the state is prepared to pay BEE premiums, but has not been prepared to say how much is paid or has been paid every year since at least 2008. Ultimately, by everyone and the poorest who pay disproportionately high value added tax. So he argues that how much taxpayer money is paid out in BEE premiums, no one exactly knows. But that they discovered a paper by the late University of KZN professor Stephen Oseko Migoro, actually, which showed that in a small sample from 2010, the average premium paid under BEE policy was roughly 20%, and that sample came from a procurement office in Mabato Northwest and should not be assumed to represent the national average today. He also argues that he knows that taxpayers are funding BEE premiums actually today. So BEE premiums are, according to Gabriel Crouse, they are being funded by taxpayers. Okay. He argues that the City of Cape Town's procurement transparency report showed several BEE premiums being paid. For example, traffic signal controllers were bought from 80,273 rands, even though they were available in the tender process at 74,750 rand. So, in other words, the tender showed that the cost for traffic signal controllers were 74,750 rands, but they were eventually bought for 80,273 rands. So that's a profit of about 6,000 rands on each of these signal controllers. So it says that due to BEE, which is a BEE premium of 7.4%. So due to BEE, this kind of increases actually occur. He also argues that in the national average, he argues that if the national average for BEE premiums was 7.4%, then annual BEE premiums would total more than 80 billion rand. And by comparison, according to the official statistics in 2022, there were 13.2 million recipients of child support grants who received a cumulative of 72.7 billion rand. Now, recorded BEE premiums like the traffic tech case above are probably an order of magnitude less prevalent than that. By contrast, unrecorded BEE premiums are paid whenever the best bid is not even on the tender record because of BEE. While some BEE premiums are recorded and others are not, all BEE premiums are unreported. The latter point cannot continue. Now, Gabriel Crouse further argues that Section 216 of the Constitution requires both transparency and expenditure control at Treasury. This must be vindicated, and that he has argued at the National Assembly Finance Standing Committee and to the NCOP Finance Committee and to also provincial legislatures. So now, he argues that value versus the numbers, in trying to argue the value of BEE versus the numbers involved in securing and managing the whole BEE system, he's arguing that the 2010 Migoro study report points to a core problem with accounts confusion around BEE. In that survey, around 50 procurement officials were separately asked whether they agreed or disagreed with the claim that preferential procurement caused an extra financial burden to the state. Out of the 50 procurement officers who were in this survey, 49% agreed or strongly agreed, while 34 disagreed or strongly disagreed. This is now statistical information on, how procurement officials who were involved in this study, 50 of them, how they really interpreted, the effects of the BEE on the finance as a financial burden on the state in South Africa. So he argues that the disagreement could be disagreement between 49% and 34%. 49% agree that BEE is a financial burden to the state, while 34 disagree. He actually says that the disagreement would be understandable if the claim was paying BEE premiums is a good idea, but the value-based prompt would obviously get different responses from different officials. However, for an accountant's team to split like that about whether BEE premiums averaging around 20% on the accounting books even exist is not a way to prompt about numbers. It's not a way a prompt about numbers is supposed to be answered. So he says that some would call denial at every extra cost existence. So he says that some would call denial of any extra cost existence dishonesty. Others will call it incompetence. It is probably simpler to think of it as a product of fealty. Whatever its cause, what happens when trillions get spent under a procurement system that provides for BEE premiums under a leader, ultimately the president, who cannot admit their existence? What happens when the budget comes and goes every year and no one bothers to ask how much was spent on the primary fiscal incentive for BEE? Gabriel further argues that the Zondo report found that confusion in the procurement system arising from the inevitable tension between a maximum value for money imperative and a transformative imperative systematically facilitated state capture and advised maximizing value for money going forward. But it is not just the procurement office. Public debate itself has been captured in the confusion, says Gabriel Crouse. South Africa is heading into a sort of like an election. So this research was done before the election anyway. So it says South Africa is heading into an election, and there has already been a lot of talk, but the quantum of BEE premiums is not under debate because it is not out in the open. So he argues that in all the campaigns and all the debates surrounding the just concluded national elections in South Africa, the issue of BEE premiums weren't even really raised at all. So he says that were BEE premiums too high or too low last year, and what should come next? No one talks about that. Unlike every major budget items, no one knows how much or less Treasury expects to spend on BEE premiums in the coming year. So he argues also that the good news is that Treasury does what it is told by the Parliament. And So he also argues that also Treasury previously described he says that um on February the 6th, the NCOP Finance Committee chairperson, Yunus Karim of ANC, requested that Treasury should provide statistics within 10 days on how BEE functions in procurement. Treasury gave some useful statistics, which they acquired as researchers here. So he argues that, for example, out of the last 1.22 trillion rand in spending covered by the Central Supplier Database since 2017, about 290 billion was paid to SOEs, and another 47 billion was not racially classified. Now, 140 billion rand was paid to not black-owned companies, while 128 billion rand went to partially black-owned companies. Black-owned companies were paid 587 billion rand. This means that 883 billion rand was paid into private racially indexed hands, of which 587 billion, or 66%, went to majority black-owned businesses, and non-black businesses were paid 16%. So this is kind of like how the last BEE divide was interpreted. So he argues here that Treasury previously described the CSD as representative of procurement more broadly, and if so, it would follow that majority black-owned businesses received 2/3 of the 6.686 trillion spent over the past 7 years, which is 4.4 trillion rand. These numbers matter because the BEE premiums matter even more since they fall directly under cost controls, and that the premiums tell us what extra the state has been prepared to pay. So BEE proponents, according to Gabriel Crouse here, and BEE critics should join the call for Treasury to report these BEE problems promptly. So anyway, this is a kind of like part of the critique that Gabriel Crouse, this fellow at the Institute of Race Relations, has for this policy of BEE, and argues why the BEE should be probably replaced by something else, but it shouldn't be functioning the way it functions at the moment. And if we argue from Chris Papas's comments on how the BEE has made a group of private hands, especially the black elites, richer, while leaving the major black majority poor, one comes to question the whole way in which BEE has been managed by the ANC, and probably not the fact that the BEE is a wrong approach in itself, but the problem lies in its management by the ANC government, and how probably that could be reformed. The BEE could be reformed under the government of national unity at the moment, which is being planned by the IFP, the DA, the ANC, and probably the Patriotic Alliance, and maybe any other smaller member who will observe by Friday when they will be sworn in. But what do you guys think about Gabriel Crouse's comments in the video, and also the analysis in the Daily Maverick? Share your thoughts in the comments.